Do you want to know what happens when you give someone $50, a bucket of fake blood, and an encyclopedia of slasher cliches? The Terrifier movies, in all their gory, low-budget glory, are what happens. They feel like Tarantino went crazy and started making straight-to-VHS crossovers where Purgetown meets Hostel, run rampant by a killer clown who looks like the love child of Pennywise the Dancing Clown and the demon nun from The Conjuring, forever locked in a twisted state of deranged glee, slaughtering unsuspecting population in the most grotesque ways imaginable. There's no point in asking why. That would be like arguing with a stranger in a public park and demanding to know why he farted with no remorse or visible guilt. It's just human nature. Some people grasp the concept of public decency while others are determined to, shall we say, air it out for everyone to witness, the indecency, that is. Now, I'm not here to judge these movies as right or wrong, nor will I ever question an artist's right to create, but once it's placed in front of us, the audience, the expression itself becomes subject to judgment, and therefore within the confines set by the nature of this great art form, movies, I have to ask, was this really necessary? Couldn't you have thought of something better? Sure, you can make it fine, but why this? Just as you can fart in public, it's not a crime, though it feels like one, but come on, have some decency. You could have told a joke, made everyone laugh, but instead you chose this. In the heart of my hearts, I just know I'm not the only one who feels this way about these movies or the B-movie, slasher, body horror genre in general. There are those among you who feel the same, and to you, my brethren, I say, after much intentful self-deliberation, it finally occurred to me why this thing is a thing, especially in today's day and age. We love watching train wrecks, and the gorier the wreck, the better. And think about it. We slow down when we see a car crash, we binge true crime about serial killers, and we glue ourselves to the news during a disaster. Why? Because deep down, we're morbidly curious about what happens when things go horribly wrong. Terrifier takes that impulse and cranks it up to 11. There's no story to invest in, no characters to care about, just one grotesque murder after another. It's cinematic disaster porn, and it pulls people in because it gives them an excuse to peer over the edge of that abyss without actually having to fall in. You want to know why people gravitate toward this disgusting, blood-soaked mess called Terrifier? Because deep down, some part of our collective psyche loves to revel in the worst possible version of ourselves. But it's not just morbid curiosity. There's also this sick satisfaction in breaking every social and moral rule. Movies like Terrifier thrive on the forbidden. It's not just that they show violence, it's that they show violence with a kind of gleeful, nihilistic abandon. Look at Art the Clown. He's not just some killer with a tragic backstory. No, he's a force of pure evil. The fact that he murders people brutally, sadistically, and sometimes even with a punchline gets people going because it spits in the face of every normal human interaction we've spent centuries pretending we care about. And sure, maybe the audience isn't consciously thinking, oh, I love this because it violates societal norms. But on some level, that's exactly what's happening. But let's be real. Terrifier is not about making anyone comfortable. Horror used to dance around the line of what's acceptable, but now it's like filmmakers are daring the audience. Rand, how far can we push before you finally say enough? And people are eating it up. Why? Because in our over-sanitized, politically correct everyone wins a trophy culture, some people crave the raw, offensive, boundary-pushing chaos that these movies offer. It's like a middle finger to the moral policing of society. Escapism? Sure. If your idea of escape is wading through a bloodbath orchestrated by a clown who makes Pennywise look like a school crossing guard, but there's more to it than that. People aren't just escaping from the stress of their daily lives. They're escaping from the expectations to be good, to be decent, to pretend like human beings aren't secretly fascinated by cruelty and suffering. It's catharsis, yes, but it's also a kind of permission slip to indulge in the darker parts of ourselves we usually keep locked away. And let's not forget the sadism that bubbles beneath the surface for some viewers. You know, the ones who giggle during the disembowelments or clap when the heroine gets her head lopped off. Yeah, that's sadism. Don't let anyone tell you it's just about the gore effects or pushing boundaries. Some people get off on seeing others suffer, even if it's fictional. That's what makes films like Terrifier so successful. They give these people a free pass to indulge that side of themselves without judgment. Well, without too much judgment anyway. The truth is, celebrating movies like Terrifier feels gross because on some level it is gross. It's like celebrating a certain statistics where we all know some people lost their lives, but we can't look away because it proves a certain stereotype and we're just fascinated by how far things can go before they snap. And when you throw things like child murder into the mix, now we're really testing the limits of decency. But the fact that these movies keep getting made and keep drawing audiences says something bleak about us. We like it, not the we of polite conversation, but the we that emerges when no one's watching. So should we celebrate the success of Terrifier? No, it's more like we should study it. Like an anthropologist dissecting the rotting corpse of modern entertainment, these movies are a mirror to our society, showing us the ugly truth that, for some of us, the line between entertainment and depravity has long since blurred. And that's the real horror, isn't it? Not the clown, not the gore, but the fact that this is what gets us to buy a ticket. But hey, I might be reading too much into it. It's just a movie, right? Let's set the stage, shall we? The Terrifier, or as I like to call it, Art the Clown's midlife crisis in the afterlife, a Jackson Pollock of malevolence. This saga, and I use the term loosely, is essentially one long blood-soaked cartoon where the stakes are life or death, but somehow also feels like a bad episode of Itchy and Scratchy if Scratchy was a sadistic mime who never speaks and Itchy was the last semblance of human decency getting dismembered on repeat. Now, I'm all for creepy clowns. Clowns, in general, are creepy, probably because they wear more makeup than a news anchor on cable news and have about as much self-awareness. But Art, he's a whole other level of absurdity. His entire shtick is slaughtering people in the most grotesque, over-the-top ways imaginable, and not because there's some underlying motivation. No, it's just because, why not? The first movie gives us no backstory, no reason, just 2 hours of, hey, look what I can do with a rusty hacksaw, and no moral compass. Let's treat these three cinematic atrocities, films, as one grotesque, glorious plot, shall we? Buckle up. We're diving into the psychotic fever dream that is the Terrifier universe. The first film is essentially an exercise in figuring out how far you can stretch the definition of narrative while packing in enough gore to make a butcher wince. We meet Art the Clown, a creation so devoid of motivation or reason that he's practically a walking metaphor for nihilism. He's not just here to kill. He's here to make you question why you ever thought life had meaning. We start with some disfigured woman being mocked on live TV, only for her to gouge out the host's eyes. Real subtle foreshadowing, folks. Then Art waltzes onto the scene like a deranged mime who's just been told he's got an audience of gorehounds to impress. He slashes, saws, and shoots his way through a Halloween night with no rhyme or reason other than, hey, wouldn't this be cool? The highlight, if you can call it that, is when he saws a woman in half vertically. Yes, because nothing says deranged clown quite like tearing a human into 2 slabs of meat. It's splatterpunk at its laziest, shock over substance, gore over story. Art gets kicked out of a pizzeria for defiling the bathroom, but the real crime is expecting us to take this killer clown seriously while the script's in pieces just like his victims. By the end, after playing a fun little game of how many brutal deaths can we fit into 90 minutes, Art blows his own brains out, but not before making sure we know he'll be back, just like Zuckerberg with another new idea for a dystopia. Then we get to Terrifier 2, 2022, which is basically Terrifier 1 on laxatives. You'd think after the first film, someone might ask the important question, should we really give this lunatic more screen time? But no, the powers that be decided we needed 138 minutes of this. Yep, a slasher sequel longer than its original because what we all needed was more Art the Clown, complete with even more inventive ways to torture people. This time around, we get a little backstory. And by backstory, I mean they introduce a supernatural element. Yeah, because when you're running out of ideas, just slap on some lazy mysticism to explain why Art can keep coming back for more bloodbaths. They took the simple premise of the first film and said, let's add 2 more hours and some supernatural mumbo-jumbo. Art's resurrected, of course. This time he's joined by the little pale girl, a fellow freaky entity who somehow manages to be more annoying than terrifying. They have this weird invisible to some shtick going on like a demonic buddy cop duo, but with more scalpings and cannibalism. Meanwhile, we get a half-baked final girl in Sienna Shaw who's apparently some angel warrior in training because her late father thought that'd be a fun family hobby. She's supposed to be our beacon of hope in this bloodbath, but she spends most of her time having hallucinations, surviving flaming bedrooms, and trying to not let her kid brother Jonathan gets sliced in half by Art. Art's routine of murder by cartoonish violence continues. There's even a kill in a Halloween shop because apparently retail therapy is a thing in the afterlife. The gore goes from absurd to downright laughable. I mean, at one point, Art scalps a woman and wears her breasts. Yes, because why not? The movie culminates in the ultimate horror showdown at, you guessed it, a haunted carnival attraction. Art gets killed about 47 times but keeps coming back. Kind of like a cockroach with a god complex. Sienna, in a move that seems ripped straight from a video game boss fight, gets resurrected by her dad's sword, don't ask, and decapitates Art. Cue the little pale girl wandering off with his head because now we've entered the phase of horror franchises where the writers throw darts at a board to decide what's next. So what's left for Art the Clown? Apparently Christmas massacres, because nothing says holiday cheer like decapitating mall Santas and planting explosives in gift boxes. Sienna, still traumatized from the last movie, and who wouldn't be, is dealing with the loss of her brother and her decapitated sense of reality. Meanwhile, Art and his creepy sidekick Victoria, who now happens to be possessed by the little pale girl, are out of hibernation and back to terrorize the world. It's basically the same formula. Art kills everyone in increasingly ridiculous ways, including more children. Yes, Art's really leaning into the child killer role now, making Freddy Krueger look like Edward Scissorhands, tragic and misunderstood by comparison. This third film introduces more convoluted lore. We get portals to hell, more possession, a clown-themed family reunion in a haunted house, and some bizarre, half-hearted attempt to inject religious imagery into this gore fest. Sienna gets a crown of thorns. Get it? She's the savior in this gore-drenched dumpster fire. Oh, and Art escapes because, come on, say it with me. Money, as a fellow Faust, I salute you, sir. What you're looking at here is essentially the evolution or devolution of horror. The Terrifier movies don't care about plot, story, screenplay, character, or even horror, really. They care about excess. These films are what happens when you mix slasher tropes, gratuitous body horror, and supernatural nonsense in a blender and hit smoothie. Art the Clown is the embodiment of what happens when nihilism and sadism collide in a glorified snuff film. There's no moral, no reason, no catharsis, just blood, guts, and more blood. He's a force of nature, yes, but a force that feels like it crawled out of a bad nightmare and took up permanent residence in a grindhouse theater. There's no growth, no change, just the same tired dance of mutilation, resurrection, and repetition until the audience is either numb or laughing at the absurdity of it all. The Terrifier trilogy is like a clown car from hell, except every time it stops, another body is thrown out. It's obscene, grotesque, and utterly pointless, and that's exactly why people can't stop watching. But here's the thing. Despite all the nonsense, these films revel in their lack of coherence. They know they're trash, and they wallow in it like pigs in a mud pit. Art doesn't need a motive because the audience that shows up for Terrifier doesn't care about character arcs or plot structure. They're there to watch a clown rip people apart in the most elaborate, borderline cartoonish ways possible. It's a horror movie for people who think story, screenplay, and dialogue in a movie is overrated and that death sequences are an art form. In conclusion, Terrifier movies are basically what happens when you take the gore-soaked fever dreams of an undergrad film student who just discovered practical effects and went crazy with it. They're absurd, senseless, and deeply nihilistic, much like modern Hollywood. But hey, at least Art the Clown doesn't pretend to be deep. He's just here to kill, crack a few silent jokes, and throw that wicked grin at you because he knows you're secretly enjoying something or someone you know is grotesque and ugly in character. I respect that.